Between 1933 and 1940, millions of Jews were caught in the Nazi extermination machinery, living through a daily reality of ghettos, hunger, fear, and death camps. Stripped of dignity and hope, their existence was reduced to survival against impossible odds. This is the real life of a Jew during the Holocaust. What did it truly mean to live as a Jew during the Holocaust? To wake each morning uncertain if you would see nightfall? To face hunger so severe that bread became more precious than gold? Behind the statistics and photographs were ordinary families, parents, children, grandparents, struggling through ghettos, deportations, and camps. Yet, even in the face of cruelty, there were fragments of hope, whispered prayers, secret schools, stolen moments of love, and the power of imagination. In this video, we step inside that daily reality, harsh, human, and unforgettable, to understand survival in history's darkest chapter. Chapter 1. Ghetto Routine and Hunger. Hunger was the dictator of every ghetto. It decided who lived, who weakened, and who quietly disappeared into the silence of starvation. From the moment Jews were herded into ghettos across Nazi-occupied Europe, food became the rarest currency of all, a weapon wielded by their oppressors, and a torment that gnawed at every waking moment. The ghettos were never meant to sustain life. They were designed to contain, to suffocate, to slowly erase a people. Streets overflowed with the displaced, families crammed into one room, strangers forced to share a bed, children sleeping in corners. The stench of uncollected waste mingled with the smell of boiled potato skins, when even skins could be found. The Nazis dictated rations that no human could survive on, sometimes less than 200 calories a day. In Warsaw, a Jew was allotted barely 180 calories, while their German overseers enjoyed over 2,600. It was starvation by calculation. Every morning began with a kind of dreadful rhythm. The ghetto stirred awake not with birdsong or laughter, but with the creak of carts carrying away the dead. Neighbors whispered prayers before stepping outside, unsure if they would return. Families queued for hours at distribution points, clutching bowls for a ladle of thin soup or a few crumbs of bread that could barely sustain a child. But desperation breeds ingenuity. Children, with their small bodies and nimble frames, became smugglers. They slipped through cracks in the walls, beneath fences, or even through sewers, risking beatings or bullets to bring back onions, flour, or potatoes. Many never returned. Yet others did, heroes in patched clothing, carrying life in their arms. Their mothers would break down in tears, not just from relief, but from the crushing knowledge that survival depended on the dangerous bravery of their youngest. Bartering became another way to cling to life. A wedding ring might buy a loaf of bread. A fur coat stripped of its former meaning could be exchanged for a sack of potatoes. Families dismantled their past piece by piece, trading memories and heirlooms for a few more days of existence. Hunger also changed the rhythm of time. Days blurred into one another, measured not by calendars, but by the distance between meals. For many, the body shrank, the face hollowed, the mind dulled. Yet, remarkably, hunger did not always strip away humanity. Neighbors shared scraps with the weaker ones. Mothers divided one slice of bread into 5, pretending they were not hungry so their children might eat. And in the shadows, secret kitchens sprang up, run by underground groups, where a bowl of soup became an act of resistance. Life in the ghetto was defined by starvation, but it was also defined by resilience. To eat was survival, but to share was defiance. In the quietest corners of despair, the will to endure still flickered, proof that even under the harshest chains of hunger, the human spirit refused to be consumed. Chapter 2: Family Ties and Broken Bonds. If hunger ruled the body, it was family that kept the heart beating in the ghettos. In every cramped room and dimly lit corner, family bonds became both the anchor and the agony of Jewish survival during the Holocaust. The Nazis sought not only to kill Jews physically, but also to dismantle their social fabric. Families were uprooted from their homes and forced into overcrowded tenements, where 3 or 4 households squeezed into a single apartment. Privacy vanished. Mothers cooked over tiny stoves in hallways, while children slept head to toe on straw mats. Yet, within this suffocating closeness, families fought to create a semblance of normal life. Parents still told bedtime stories. They still whispered blessings on Friday nights, even when bread for Sabbath was just a scrap. Mothers, often the center of resilience, bore impossible burdens. With men deported to labor camps or arrested during raids, many women became both caretaker and provider. They stood in ration lines, bartered on black markets, and guarded what little food they had like treasure. Some starved themselves silently so their children could eat. A mother's whispered lie, "I am not hungry," became an act of sacrifice repeated countless times. Fathers who remained carried their own kind of torment. Stripped of their ability to protect or provide, many felt their authority crumble. Some worked in Jewish councils or forced labor groups, clinging to the hope that their position might spare their families, if only for a little longer. Others faded into quiet despair, watching helplessly as their children grew thinner by the day. Children bore the weight of decisions far too heavy for their years. Some parents made the painful choice to send their sons and daughters away with strangers, hoping Christian families or underground networks could hide them. Tearful goodbyes were whispered in dark alleys, the knowledge lingering that they might never embrace one another again. For those who stayed, childhood was shortened overnight. A boy became a smuggler. A girl became a caretaker for younger siblings while her mother searched for food. Even in the face of constant fear, family bonds sparked moments of resistance. Families gathered around small tables to celebrate holidays in secret, a candle hidden in a jar, a scrap of bread blessed as matzah, a hummed prayer. All were defiant declarations that love and tradition could not be extinguished. Parents tried to shield their children from despair, telling stories of better times, reminding them of songs and prayers that Nazis could never steal. But the ghettos were merciless. Deportation shattered families again and again. German soldiers would storm through streets, tearing children from their parents' arms, pushing elderly grandparents into trucks. Scenes of desperate embraces, of mothers clutching their children with every ounce of strength, were repeated until grief became a familiar neighbor. In the ghettos, family was both a shield and a wound. It gave people a reason to fight for one more day, but it also magnified the pain of loss when loved ones were taken away. Even so, the bonds of kinship endured, proving that love remained one of the few things the Nazis could never fully destroy. Chapter 3: secret cultures, and hidden education. In the ghettos, the Nazis controlled every visible part of life: food, movement, work, even the right to breathe freely. But in the hidden corners of that oppression, Jews fought back. In a way the Nazis never fully crushed. They preserved their culture, their prayers, and their children's right to learn. Education, banned in many ghettos, became an act of defiance. Parents refused to let their children grow up in ignorance, even under the shadow of death. Secret schools were organized in basements, back rooms, and attics. A handful of books, tattered and passed hand to hand, became treasures. Teachers risked their lives to teach mathematics, literature, and Hebrew prayers to children who gathered in hushed silence, listening as though knowledge itself were bread. A child's recitation of a poem or arithmetic table was not just learning, it was survival of identity. Culture, too, refused to die. The ghettos witnessed clandestine concerts, theater plays, and even art exhibitions. Musicians tuned broken violins and played in candlelit rooms, their melodies both haunting and hopeful. Actors staged small performances that spoke in metaphor, daring to remind audiences of freedom and dignity. These were not luxuries, they were lifelines. They kept people human in a system designed to strip them of their humanity. Religious rituals continued in secrecy. On Friday evenings, families risked punishment to light Sabbath candles, hidden behind drawn curtains. Men wrapped prayer shawls in back rooms, whispering words of ancient faith. Their voices trembling but determined. During Passover, scraps of bread were blessed as matzah, and children asked the traditional questions, keeping alive rituals that stretched back thousands of years. In those sacred moments, the ghettos became more than prisons. They became sanctuaries of resistance. Writing and art also flourished underground. Diaries were kept by both adults and children, recording not only the horrors, but also the small triumphs: a smuggled potato, a secret class, a wedding in the ghetto courtyard. Artists sketched the world around them: gaunt faces, overcrowded rooms, children with hollow eyes, determined that future generations would know what had happened. Many of these works were buried in jars and boxes, hidden beneath the earth, waiting to be uncovered after the war. Even in concentration camps, fragments of culture survived. Prisoners scratched poems on scraps of paper, sang lullabies in whispers, and passed down stories in barracks after grueling days of labor. These acts, though fragile, declared one unshakable truth: the Nazis could take homes, families, and even lives, but they could not extinguish the spirit that defined a people. Culture and education were never just about tradition during the Holocaust. They were about resistance. To teach a child, to sing a song, to write a diary, to say a prayer, each was a quiet rebellion, a way of saying, "We are still here and we will not vanish." Chapter 4: Daily Struggles, Survival in the Camps. Every day inside a Nazi concentration camp was a battle not just for life, but for humanity itself. Survival was not guaranteed. It was a fragile thread stretched between hunger, disease, labor, and the arbitrary cruelty of guards. For millions of Jews, waking up each morning meant stepping into another day of unimaginable torment. The day began before dawn. Prisoners were jolted awake by whistles, barking dogs, and the shouts of SS officers. Still half asleep and weak from hunger, men, women, and children scrambled to line up for roll call. This wasn't a quick procedure. Roll calls could last hours, even in freezing winters or sweltering summers. Prisoners stood motionless, barely clothed, sometimes forced to witness executions or beatings during the count. Fainting or falling out of line often meant death. After roll call came the bread ration, if one could call it bread. A thin slice of blackened, moldy bread was all many received, sometimes accompanied by a watery coffee or weak soup. This wasn't food meant to nourish. It was food meant to keep prisoners barely alive, just enough to work another day. Hunger gnawed at every waking moment. People dreamed of meals they would never eat again. Starvation hollowed their faces, stole their strength, and often their hope. Work followed immediately. Camps like Auschwitz, Dachau, and Treblinka functioned on forced labor. Prisoners carried stones, built roads, dug trenches, or toiled in factories that powered the Nazi war machine. Work was grueling, designed to break both body and spirit. Those too weak to continue were often beaten or selected for death. The slogan at Auschwitz, Arbeit macht frei, work sets you free, was a cruel mockery. Work did not bring freedom. It was another weapon of annihilation. Yet, amid such suffering, small acts of defiance and resilience emerged. A mother shared her last crumb of bread with her child. A prisoner whispered a prayer during labor, clinging to faith when everything else was stripped away. Some risked their lives to smuggle scraps of food or exchange information. These tiny gestures became lifelines, reminders that even in hell, humanity could survive. The evenings brought no relief. After hours of exhausting labor, prisoners returned for another roll call. Punishments were frequent: beatings, humiliations, or random selections for execution. Then came the meal, a watery broth with little more than cabbage or potato peels floating inside. Malnutrition bred disease, typhus, dysentery, tuberculosis that spread rapidly in filthy, overcrowded barracks. Medical care was almost non-existent. For many, sickness became a death sentence. And yet, the greatest torment wasn't always physical. It was psychological. The camps stripped Jews of identity, replacing names with numbers tattooed on forearms. Families were torn apart, dignity shredded, individuality risked. Prisoners often asked themselves haunting questions. How long can I last? Will I see my loved ones again? Am I still human? Daily survival in the camps wasn't simply about staying alive. It was about fighting against a system designed to destroy body, soul, and memory. Each day was an endurance test of unimaginable cruelty, but also of quiet courage. Chapter 5. Shadows of Survival. The war ended, but for those who lived through the Holocaust, the battle never truly stopped. Liberation did not erase the memories carved into their souls. It only shifted them into a new kind of struggle. Survivors stepped into a world forever changed, one that often did not understand the weight they carried. Imagine walking free from the gates of Auschwitz or Bergen-Belsen, only to find yourself staring at an empty horizon. Homes were gone, families were gone, entire communities erased. For many, there was no place to return to. They wandered across ruins of cities and towns that once held life, now reduced to ash and silence. How does one rebuild from that? How does one breathe in a world that had watched and remained silent? Some survivors chose silence. They buried their memories deep, speaking nothing of the camps, of the hunger, of the humiliation, and the endless nights of fear. For decades, many did not tell their children or even their grandchildren what they endured. Pain lived in their eyes, but seldom in their words. Others, however, felt an obligation to speak, to make sure the horrors were never forgotten. They became living witnesses, carrying stories that textbooks could never fully capture. But beyond testimony was the daily battle with trauma. Nightmares haunted their sleep. The stench of burning, the barking of dogs, the roll call at dawn. They returned in fragments again and again. Survivors often describe the sensation of being alive as almost unbearable. Some lived with survivors' guilt, questioning why they had made it out when brothers, sisters, parents, and friends had not. It was a question with no answer, yet one that weighed on them like a stone. And yet, amid all that darkness, there was resilience. Many rebuilt lives from nothing. They married, they had children, they built businesses, they went to universities. In Israel, America, and across Europe, Holocaust survivors carried the burden of memory while carving out futures that defied what their captors had intended. Every child born to them was a quiet act of resistance, a living declaration that the Nazis had failed to extinguish Jewish life. Still, scars remained. They lingered in small details, the way a survivor never wasted food, no matter how spoiled, the way they shuddered at the sound of train whistles, the way they insisted on keeping a packed suitcase ready by the door just in case. These habits were not eccentricities. They were echoes of terror embedded in survival. And so, the story of Holocaust survivors is not only one of pain, but of endurance. They carried their nightmares, but they also carried an unwavering truth. To live was to resist. To remember was to honor. To speak was to fight against forgetting. The Holocaust ended in 1945. But for its survivors, its shadows stretched across lifetimes. And the question still hangs for us today. When the last witness is gone, will the world remember? Or will silence once again allow darkness to creep in? The Holocaust was not just history. It was the shattering of humanity itself. These were lives stolen, voices silenced, and dreams destroyed. But their memory must live on. If this story moved you, honor it. Like this video, subscribe for more history content.